I think the concept of each one of these ranges will make more sense once we start to apply advance and retard timing values to those. One thing I'd like to talk about before we leave this screen is another tool that we have up here called marks. I'm going to zoom in a little bit further and I'll turn on marks. And what these marks are, they actually provide a value for each one of these grips that we have. So that value is in time and drive shaft RPM. So it gives you another idea of the kind of control and precision that we have to control these. So I can turn marks on or off. If I zoom back out, remember we've got 1,000 of these grips across here. So if you have marks toggled on in this mode, you're not going to be able to see much. So I'll turn the marks back off. Another thing I wanted to show is this is on a 24-inch display. Sometimes at the track we don't have the luxury of having a big display. We're maybe working off from a laptop. So another tool that we have down here is being able to turn off the bottom portion of the screen so all we see is the area that deals with the profile. If I want to see the timing screen again, there's a tab down here in the lower left-hand corner, and I can toggle that back on again. So let's talk a little bit about zones. What zones do, each zone, if you will, has its own set of parameters that we can assign. Depending on what kind of power adder you have, whether it's a nitrous car, turbo car, blower car, each one of those cars has different characteristics at different parts during the run. For instance, in a nitrous car, the first second or so, maybe second and a quarter, we're really busy applying retards, turning kits on, and so on. So I might have a different set of parameters that I want to set for a nitrous car than a blower car, but the good news is it works for any power adder or no power adders for that matter. So let's assign a zone by time. As you can see on the screen, it starts out at 0, which is release of the trans brake. In this case, it goes up to 3.5 seconds. If I want to reduce that, let's say I want to make it for maybe the first half of a second. So I can make that to 0.5. Maybe zone 2, I want from 0.5 to, let's say, 0.75. In zone 3, I want from 0.75 to, let's say, 1.5. And then let's add another zone. And I can add a zone with this button. And I can also save these zones once I have these set up to our library so I can recall them back again so I don't have to redo all my settings. So let's add another zone. And you can see the zones correspond by color, the zone here, the box color, and on the screen. So we did our last zone from from 3.88 to 7 seconds. So now that we've divided our screen up, and we've divided up our time into different sections, maybe this makes more sense in here with the different ranges and the values to those ranges. So let's say in zone 1, I want to be able to pull out maybe more retard than I want to do in zone 2. So I can say for the first retard, maybe I want to pull out 3/4 of a degree. If it gets into the yellow zone, let's make that 1.5 degrees. And on a nitrous car, we have to be careful about how much timing we pull, so let's make that 3 degrees. And then as far as advance, works the same way. So I could do 1 degree of advance here, and let's make it 3 degrees advance if it gets into the blue zone. So basically you go through and set up each one of these zones. In other words, customize each zone to whatever your requirements are. We also have an option here called Smart Drop Limit, SDL. What Smart Drop does is once the drive shaft RPM exceeds 76% of whatever RPM value is assigned to that zone, it kicks in and starts dropping a cylinder up from 1 cylinders to 4 cylinders, and it doesn't do the same cylinder twice. And we've proved this. It works very well on a nitrous car. We had it set to 1, setting of 1. Blower cars, you may be able to get away with more, same way on a turbo car. So I can turn Smart Drop off or on for each one of these zones. So that's basically the concept of the zones. Maybe that makes a little bit more sense now that we've actually put an application to it. Before moving on to the timing section, let's go through a little bit more editing in detail. Let's say that we made a couple of runs and we realized that a certain section of the run, the profiler was adding timing throughout that section, and maybe it rattled the tires. So that's going to tell us that, hey, maybe our profile is a little bit too aggressive. Maybe the track conditions aren't quite as good, but to avoid long sections of correction and so on, we've determined that we should maybe bring our profile down a little bit. Let's be realistic about it. So here's how we might do that. So I can select the section that I want to change and zoom in like we did before. And let's say that I want to adjust the profile, let's say from 0.9 to 1.35 seconds. And I want to bring that whole section down just a little bit. So if I go to 0.9, I can do a Control left mouse click, and if you notice, the grip turned red. And if I go over here to 1.35 and I do a shift click, that whole section that we want to change has been highlighted in red. So that means we now have control over that section. So if I want to bring it all down a little bit, I can do it a couple of different ways. So I can either just drag it down with the mouse, and kind of rough it in that way. A really nice feature that we have with a profiler is a smoothing function. It's up here in the chart tools. So if I select this multiple times, each time I click on it, you're going to see that those dots, or our grips, actually become a nice smooth line. So I can select that as many times as I want till I get it as smooth as I want it, and now that looks much better. So now what's going to happen is instead of all those corrections that I was getting in there, I lowered this down a little bit, and that should alleviate that. Maybe it'll be a little bit easier to follow our profile. And we can do the same function if we wanted to move the line up. Again, you have to be a tuner. This isn't a silver bullet box. You've got to know what to do under what conditions, whether you want less wheel speed, more wheel speed, how much correction you want, and so on and so forth. But the tools are all here. That's the good thing. A couple of things I want to point out before we leave ranges and zones. The RPM range of these different zones, the wider the range is, the less aggressive the profiler will be if the drive shaft RPM is in that zone. So if I narrow my zone up, it's going to catch the RPM quicker and try and correct it quicker than it is if I make the zone wider, let's say 50 versus 100, and so on. So there'll be a point where you'll understand what your car does and kind of will give you an idea of where you might want to adjust your zone widths. The other thing is on the zones, notice that my last zone, in this case it's zone 4, I have from 3.8 to 7 seconds. If the car makes it down to the track, probably a second and a half or longer, it's going to make it the rest of the way. So I probably don't want my profiler, for instance, let's say I have a good run that goes above my profile. I don't want it to pull retard and slow my run down. So I've made the fourth zone here, basically everything zeroed out. So once the car makes it that far, and likelihood is you're probably going to set it maybe sooner than 3.8 seconds in this case. But it's just a good idea that for that part of the run, you have everything zeroed out. If the car runs faster, great. We're not going to slow it down. So that pretty well summarizes zones and ranges. So next video, we'll move on to the timing section.